There.
And we're live.
I'm in.
Hey, good afternoon. And just in the nick of time, we have our guest, Jim Stritzinger. Welcome.
How you doing, Drew? Sorry for the technical challenges, but I'm here with you.
No, you were giving all of us just a little bit of a heart attack, but that is not unusual. It is so exciting to have you on the program. It was good to talk with you a little bit earlier this week and get a little sense for some of the exciting things that South Carolina has been doing, and indeed some of the things that you've been doing. We're in the broadband community discussing, or in an Ask Me Anything with Jim Stritzinger. Have I got that right, Jim? I'm always a little uncertain on how you say that last name.
Well, as a father of three daughters, hey, you works fine with me too. Yeah, you got it perfect. Yep.
Well, Jim, as the executive director of the South Carolina Broadband Office, we are very excited to have you on the show. We've had many other state broadband leaders from states including Mississippi, Louisiana, Indiana, Maine, and I'm sure I've forgotten some. Virginia. We'll have many more, and so you're part of a tradition of many people being able to speak in detail, right? I mean, we want to explain our terms, right? But we also really want to dig in to some of the issues that you're facing as a state broadband leader in South Carolina, and particularly you, because of your really fascinating background, which I want to dive in soon. But before I do that, Jim, just welcome and tell us just a little bit about yourself and how you got into this field in general.
Well, it's been an interesting, a really interesting twist and set of turns in my career that have led me to this. I saw in your notes that you asked, what would a geek want to do with a job like this? So, I'm honestly, this particular job is the role of my lifetime, and it's the greatest honor of my lifetime to get to do this on behalf of the citizens of South Carolina. And I've through college, undergrad electrical engineer. That's way back in the 80s. I'm getting to be kind of old now, but electrical engineering background for sure. And then I've have a master's degree. I took 30 years off when got a master's in health IT. So I'm a very, I affectionately embrace the term nerd.
Yeah.
I love doing a lot of data, and my entree into the broadband world started in the summer of 2014. You and I discussed this earlier in the week, but I was running a nonprofit program called Connect South Carolina. I was the executive director of that. So really a philanthropic adventure into the world of broadband. But of course, back then, we didn't have any huge federal and state investment to really make anything happen. So as an engineer, I got frustrated studying all the problems and then never having any financial firepower to really make things happen. So that's why I'm so excited. I know what the issues are. We've done a lot of research on it. We've done a lot of mapping, and we'll talk more about that. But it's now, as an engineer, there's nothing greater in your life than being able to actually solve the problems at hand, and we're able to do that now.
Well, let's go back even further, right? So I want to go back to Clearview Software and tell us a little bit about what that is, does, and that's distinguished from Revolution D. Could you speak to the prior things that you've done in this realm of the software engineering realm, so to speak?
Yeah, well, surely. Well, I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. My dad had a business when I graduated from high school. My dad had started a computer store, and so my whole life I've grown up an entrepreneurial family. So in early 90s, I started a software company called Clearview Software, and my company's specialty was doing accounting software applications and interfaces to a product called Solomon Software. So, doing database stuff, doing integration work with accounting systems was the name of the game, and had the good fortune in late '90s that my little baby company got acquired and by a much larger company, and we grew, and I stayed with that, and then couple of acquisitions later, my little baby company became part of Microsoft in the early part of 2001.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and the name Revolution D comes from what, Jim?
well, as I moved on from Clearview, and I after my company got acquired, I got my chance to move to South Carolina for the first time, and was actually in the Hilton Head area, and really just wanted to get something started, see if I could figure out a way to get some things going, and created Revolution D way back in actually calendar year 2002. And I've just done a variety of things, consulting projects along the way. But I guess what's bringing us a little bit closer to home, Revolution D wound up getting really a new lease on life. As entrepreneurs do, you kind of pivot from time to time. And in January of 2019, I really decided to focus in on broadband, and really particularly the mapping aspects, and to see if I could come up with a new invention that might change the way people look at broadband mapping, and hopefully that would reveal some really interesting things for South Carolina.
Oh, very cool. No, that does get us up to speed. So let me take kind of three data points in time to 2014, 2019, and 2021. Okay, and so starting with 2014, you just mentioned that date a little bit earlier, right? And just for our readers, for our listeners, watchers, everyone should be aware that there was a prior state broadband initiative that went on from 2009, 2010 up until 2014, 15. And in some ways, this was birthed by a lot of initiative by many entities, including Connected Nation, including Broadband Census, the entity I founded way back when. We were focused on trying to get that census block-based approach to data, right? And Connected Nation actually did one of their first maps, if you will, in South Carolina, as I know you're familiar with. So let's talk pre-2014. I mean, obviously you've had to discover this after that time, looking back, but what went on, and in particular, what went on in South Carolina up until that time?
Sure, and of course, as you're well aware, Drew, the State Broadband Initiative was NTIA's first real effort to build broadband maps in the United States, and no state really had one. So in South Carolina, there was an entity called Connect South Carolina, and the job was to build the first ever iteration of the South Carolina broadband map. So when you're starting from nothing, you had to reach out to the internet providers. And to be clear, I joined the effort late, really with the last 9 months of the program. But, the folks ahead of me did a lot of the networking with the internet service providers, cobbled together the first efforts around mapping. And of course, maps were not really GIS based. In some cases, you were getting paper maps and having to assimilate that and do some digitization. Mm-hmm. And everybody did it a little bit different back then. So the effort to try to develop a standardized map was really, really hard in 2009. And so I'm grateful for all those that came before me and worked hard on that. And of course, that was part of Connected Nation. And of course, that was the goal, as you remember, to get it in a place, a successful place, and then turn it over to the FCC. Mm-hmm. And then that's what happened in the early part of 2014. So in January 2014, all of the turnover occurred, and the FCC picked up the baton from all 50 states and carried that forward in the form of the FCC Form 477 process that we're, all intimately familiar with now.
So you again, I hope we got our dates right in the little bio we have here, but we had noted that you began in 2014 to many years after the successful software company was sold, you joined Connect South Carolina in 2014. Is that right? And you were and what happened in between? Like, so in other words, we've turned the page on the State Broadband Initiative program in 2014. South Carolina has to do things differently. What was being done from 14 to 19, and what were you doing as part of that process?
So, well, the federal funding ran out, but when you're kind of, you want to keep the torch alive, keep the flames burning, and do what you can. So I was able to cobble together a couple of grants, just kind of scratching and clawing. We got a grant from U.S. Department of Agriculture to study a small region of South Carolina,
right?
Doing city planning, really county-specific projects back then, because we didn't have enough money to stand up a full statewide program. But it was really useful for me because I kept meeting communities. I kept meeting, Chamber of Commerce directors, hospital leaders, very important people in the communities, school superintendents, but at a county level. So just kept going, and candidly was polishing my own skills to learn more about the mapping, to dig into the raw data, to learn what the issues were. But it's not just on the infrastructure side, of course. It's on the adoption side.
Yeah.
Hearing the voices of the community, the frustrations they've got, their challenges using internet, their fears of cybersecurity, things like that. So a lot of different efforts along the way. But it was really hard when you're not really sure where your next paycheck comes from to really muster the forces required to, doing a statewide effort was near impossible back then, because you just didn't have enough to even pay your own rent in your own
absolutely. Well, now what about 2019? Was there an evolution or a slight change in your platform at that time?
Well, yeah. What was interesting is as Connect South Carolina was winding down, it gave me some personal time to go back and work on my master's degree. I mentioned that I took 30 years off and then went back to school. I was really, working at the university part-time and doing my master's degree. So calendar year 2017 and 2018, I actually graduated with my master's in May of 2018 to kind of orient you. And I wrote a grant for the university, which we won. And it was really to build the IBM Center at the University of South Carolina. So that was my first real exposure to the world of Watson and artificial intelligence and things like that, which was wonderful. But that was short-lived at the university. End of 2018, I really needed to get back to my entrepreneurial roots. And what we did is, really the big idea was to see if I could actually build an artificial intelligence model that could help unlock the secrets and the mysteries of broadband.
Yeah. Well, and it's this again for our readers, listeners, watchers. Just to kind of orient people, you stated it well, Jim. That 2014 was this kind of cutoff, black box cutoff, if you will, and these state broadband initiatives that have been out there, doing a lot of mapping, doing a lot of verification, doing a lot of engagement. They kind of went dark for the most part. About half continued in some form, but most went out. And what happened then is that there was this period as you've discussed, and where South Carolina was doing something, some other states were doing interesting, and there's this long period of like gradually worsening data over at the FCC, right? And the other thing happening is, like you said, AI tools are coming online, and so 2019, there's a lot more interest. The calls to fix the maps are getting louder and louder. Comedians are making jokes about broadband maps, and the Broadband Data Act is passed in the lead up 2019, passed in 2020, and basically that act is basically giving a lot more teeth to it. And of course, there's other efforts going on, some of which involve AI, to really use better tools in order to tap into some of the challenges that the 1.0 version of broadband mapping were happening, right? And so, is there anything that you learned from that kind of AI experience that kind of reinvigorated things as you started, as we reported here, that you started working with Jim Clyburn, and to tell us a little bit about what he and you all did at the Rural Broadband Task Force?
Well, it was really fun, Drew, to really honestly have some personal time to just experiment, explore. But the fundamental hypothesis is, holy smokes, everybody's laughing at the FCC data. There's got to be a better way to do it. And, my personal hypothesis is, if you just look at the FCC data by itself, you have a failed outcome. The whole idea of mashing up FCC data and combining it with, the Ookla speed test data,
right.
I thought there's really some magic there. But beginning of 2019, candidly, I had no idea how to do it. But I had, I had the gift of being home alone, peace and quiet, with a server in my basement and fiber coming into my house. I had basically unlimited internet capability. Again, being a nerd, I have a 42-inch plotter in my basement. So I had a self-contained experimental center in my house, and I've got 20 years of database experience. I've worked with Microsoft SQL Server for tons of time, and I couldn't afford, of course, as a startup, to purchase Watson or any of the AI tools. So my poor man's equivalent was writing some SQL code to try to achieve the same thing. But also, funny, I had never seen Esri ArcGIS before. Total rookie. So I started working on the database side, but also self-taught myself ArcGIS, and began putting the pieces together. When you do a project like this, you kind of have to work back and forth. You have to work from the map to the data, from the data to the map, and then write all of these custom queries. So, in the end, there's something like 3,000 lines of SQL code I wrote doing complicated merges and joins and all of that kind of stuff. But I wound up with a really interesting data set at the end, which really unlocked South Carolina. And one of the big changes after really digging into the raw lines of data was recognizing that it's not so much, one of the big frustrations, which well, of the Form 477 data is the ISPs are allowed to report their advertised speeds. And, through an engineer's lens, I was looking at the raw lines of code, and I realized pretty quickly that the advertised speeds are useless.
Exactly.
However, I noticed this other column, which was the technology type. That's where the light bulb went off. And of course, from an engineer's perspective, I've known this. We all know this. And the analogy I use for folks that aren't broadband nerds is I say, if I drive past your house and I see a Ferrari sitting in your driveway, I know how fast you can drive. If I drive past your house and I see a minivan sitting in your driveway, you can tell me that car goes 200 miles an hour, but I know you're lying.
Right.
Right?
No, exactly.
And really the same is true with internet technologies. If I drive past your house and I can see your home is connected to fiber, I know you can drive as fast as you can afford to drive.
Right.
And that that's the genius. So once we landed at, I'll just simplify it for everybody. Once you recognize that any home with fiber and any home with high-speed cable is not one of my problems, that was really a major light bulb moment. And then you realize what your problems really are is the places with DSL, or more importantly, the homes that have nothing at all.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to we got many listener questions. We're going to get to those just now, but could you just kind of close out this phase and tell us just a little bit about Jim Clyburn and the rural broadband task force and the transition from Connect South Carolina to the official state broadband office head in South Carolina, Jim?
Sure. So as my experiments continued to unfold a little bit, Congressman Clyburn became aware of my effort. I began meeting his staff members. The experiment was unfolding. I was able to show some early versions of the map I was coming up with, and it was sparking a lot of interest with Congressman Clyburn's team. And so much so that I wound up getting an invitation to visit the U.S. Capitol, and invited me to bring some of our early mapping, some of our early results. And I literally put it in the trunk of my car and carried up some static maps to Washington, D.C., and had the thrill of my lifetime to be escorted into the House Majority Whip's conference room. And Congressman Clyburn, as you noted, is the head of the House. I think they call it the House Rural Task Force for
Right.
Broadband. And 7 members of Congress that day came into the conference room, and Congressman Clyburn introduced me and basically said, "Okay, Jim, show them what you did."
Mm-hmm.
And that was the thrill. That was a pinch yourself moment, to be sure, and I'm grateful for all of his help and support, and been very helpful in introducing me to some key players, Ookla and some others along the way, and Microsoft, and we've been able to do some really neat stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I just have to briefly mention my own little interface with Jim Clyburn and broadband mapping. When we built our first census block based map, it was in South Carolina. It was Columbia, South Carolina, and Jim Clyburn actually was instrumental in helping us to kind of get that very small pilot project off the ground. And he later came and spoke at one of our Broadband Breakfast Club events. But Clyburn, of course, this was even before Mignon Clyburn, his daughter, became an FCC commissioner. She was then South Carolina Public Service Commissioner, and she's obviously been tireless in focusing on the need for getting better quality in the broadband maps. Jim, we're going to keep talking, keep geeking out a little bit on these maps questions, but the questions are coming in. So let's come to some of them. This one from Jason Rudin. How do you think, like, what's the process you use to think about the needs for compliance and auditing after grant money is distributed in South Carolina? Do you anticipate checking on construction progress, subcontractor qualifications, etc.?
Oh, that's a great question. And honestly, it's something we're really proud of, and we've been innovating a lot there. So this is my point to give a shout out to the broadband team here in South Carolina. So I obviously brought some of my homegrown stuff to the office and got us started. But since getting it going, the compliance aspects are really complicated. And kind of the worst possible situation for a state broadband office is you make a big investment and then it fails. So we've been looking to build some tools and some technologies to help us verify that projects really come to life, and they come to life at the federally designated speeds. So we, back to my friends at IBM and Ookla, we did a little pilot project last year. And that pilot project, I kind of challenged IBM and Ookla to work together to see if we could really create a dashboard for the state of South Carolina so that we can real time see a project go live, not because the ISP told us, but we see Ookla speed tests coming in that verify. So we have independent third-party verification with an engineering grade test telling us that that section of the network is now live. And we just did a very small pilot last year. I'm excited to say that it worked. We don't have it completely in production yet, but we do have a signed agreement with IBM now. We do have a signed license agreement with Ookla. We have our server is coming to life and we'll be talking real time. But it's a combination of getting different data elements. One of the things as a broadband office, you don't want to send your team out in the field with hard hats all the time. That's a bad use of time. It gets really costly and really challenging. But if we can get pictures, so we have embedded in our grant agreements now that the internet service providers on a quarterly basis will give us construction photos. And one of the cool things about photos, as we all know, taking them, is they have embedded geotag information inside
Right.
So when an ISP just snaps a picture of a fiber splice going on or a crew on the side of a telephone pole, that image itself contains the raw data we need. So, Drew, you can imagine if you leap to the future at the completion of a project, if a broadband office has a collection of photos, a collection of speed tests, and we have independent Ookla speed tests coming in through a third party, we have pretty good, almost a bulletproof audit package at the end that the network is live from a construction perspective. And of course, we have a finance team here that's awesome. And they take wonderful care and look at all the invoices and make sure all of the payments are done. And a distinguishing thing about South Carolina is we don't spend any money until the project is complete. We don't do any advance payments or anything. So we have to be good stewards of federal money. And the only time we pay out is when we verify construction is complete. We verify all the financial records, and then we make our contribution to the project.
We got a question here from Elena Thaxton from the New Jersey Office of Broadband Connectivity. Her question centers on budgeting the planning funds, right? So what is your process for managing the design and plan of your broadband deployment program? So I guess this is a question about the plan for the plan, right? Like not so much like where the actual networks, but your plan, Jim, like what are you doing? And Elena asks, are you securing a consultant to help you with the planning and procurement? If so, how much of your planning funds are you allocating for that purpose? If not, what are you doing? What process are you following? So any reaction to that, Jim?
Sure, Elena. So thanks for that question. I think what she's referring to is the BEAD and the digital equity planning that's going on.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Yeah.
I think I'm just guessing, but I think that's what she's responding to. So a lot of broadband offices, and specific to South Carolina, is we are deploying ARPA money right now, American Rescue Plan money. And I think everybody knows that the American Rescue Plan Act funds expire, or they have to be committed by the end of December 31, 2024. And then there's 2 more years for construction completion. So the kind of the front burner, if you will, for the South Carolina Broadband Office is moving American Rescue Plan money. We have committed, the South Carolina General Assembly allocated $400 million to the broadband office in May of 2022. We deployed approximately $150 million in really the first quarter of this year. We wrapped it up on April 28th. We made our last investment. And so we really have $250 million more dollars that we have to get committed by the end of next year. That includes Capital Projects Fund, and we just opened up that grant round on May 15th. So
Okay.
we're moving that along. And then to Elena's question, how are we doing our planning? So in parallel with all of that stuff, the state is going through BEAD planning to get ready for those funds. And we're also doing digital equity planning. So my office is in charge, the South Carolina Broadband Office is in charge of the infrastructure side, the BEAD planning. And we've partnered with another state agency, Department of Administration, to do the digital equity planning effort. So we have engaged, we went through procurement and we engaged a top consulting firm to work with us on that. In fact, they were just here the last couple of days. We've enjoyed that collaboration because we didn't have enough staff inside our office to pull that off at the same time while we're doing everything else.
So, as you well know, mapping is key, but it's not the only part. And in fact, in some respects, it may not even be the most important part of what state broadband officers are doing, given that now you all have the funds, or you will, as of June 30th, have a number on a piece of paper that is the number of funds that you'll be able to award. What other skills are needed to kind of run a process? And in some ways, this is building on Elena's question, right? Like, how are you at this point in time, Jim, thinking about the way this grant process, challenge process is going to go?
Yeah, well, there's so many little modules, if you will, that each broadband office has to create. We have to create an eligibility process. We have to evaluate ISPs on whether they're capable of doing the work. What's the risk of working with one provider versus another? We have to design the map challenge process. And, kind of as I'm learning about the map challenge, we're required to get feedback from individual consumers. So it's much like the FCC has done, but at the state level. And, I'm abstracting from that some software development requirements that we're now seeing that unpack. So it's very complicated. It's also exciting. I think a good way to describe a state office is, in many ways, we've been fully deputized, if you will, by the federal government to deploy federal funds. So
Yeah.
any federal regulation that exists has to be embedded in state grant documents. And, it's a huge challenge to train our staff and get up to speed on all these different little nuances, historical preservation, NEPA requirements, resiliency requirements, Davis-Bacon requirements. I could go on and on. But our staff has to be trained. And then something that's not everybody's aware of is we have internet service providers that are all different sizes. We have some that are really family-owned companies that go back to the 1930s, rural telephone co-ops. And we not only have to learn at the state broadband office, but we have to inform and lift up even the smallest of our providers so that everybody performs at a higher level. And so it's been a big effort across the board to make that all happen.
We have a number of questions about deadlines, and one from Adiyinka Ogunlegan. My apologies, but this question asks: how does your office plan to address the connectivity needs of unserved and underserved households in MDUs, multiple dwelling units? Do you plan to allocate BEAD funds to deploy managed Wi-Fi networks? I'll get to a timeline question just now, but that question from Adienka, what do you say to those who are concerned about broadband in MDUs, in apartment buildings, in places with lots of people?
That's such a great question, and my compliments on that question, because that's really an inside baseball thing, or a graduate level class, if you will, because we've typically are really, well, we're getting better at. I'm really proud. So my team has moved from a census block mapping capability to complete statewide location level mapping. We'll have all 46 counties mapped by June 30th this year. But where where some of the higher order thinking is with MDUs. They're, Drew, as you know, they're extremely challenging. The FCC decided that an MDU, they would put a single dot on the map representing an MDU, and then you have a unit count, which represents the number of apartments within that building. So if there's 32 apartments, the unit count will be 32. What's very common, especially in public housing and things of that nature, is the first floor might have the public Wi-Fi and it's got the manager's office and they've got internet, but the second floor and the third floor, not so much. And other buildings, the building owner may own the franchise rights, if you will, to providing internet service inside the building. So I won't say we have a good solution for that yet, but now that we're at a location level and we're evaluating at a location level, we've identified that and we're going to work on that, especially because BEAD funds allow deployment to community anchor institutions. So as we define our community anchors, we will be defining those MDUs, especially the public housing MDUs, as community anchors. And we will really be getting into those and working the equation.
So John Fitz asks the timeline question. Can you please provide a timeline of what the BEAD process steps will be in South Carolina? Similar ask of Sean McDowell. What is the state's deadline to receive grant application requests? What do you know thus far, and when are you going to flesh out the rest of your timeline details, Jim?
So the way I like to describe it is most federal programs, grant programs, you have to go through a planning process first, before you reach the pot of gold. You have to go through plans, they have to get approved, and then the pot of gold becomes available. So in the state of South Carolina and across the United States, we've been told, and this is subject to change, of course, but as of June 30th, we will become aware of what the formula funding will be for the state of South Carolina for BEAD, and also, for the, really just for the BEAD program. In South Carolina, the deadline for our 5-year action plan is August 28th. And our digital equity plan is due on November 30th. There's another piece of the 5-year broadband plan. It's called the initial proposal. And that is also due before the end of the year. So we definitely want to get all the planning stuff wrapped up in calendar year 2023. And by the way, we are required, both the initial proposal and the digital equity plan are required to be posted for public comment. So just rough guess, somewhere in the October zone, we will be publishing our stuff for comment, and we'd love to have everybody commenting on those. But then it gets turned over to NTIA. NTIA has to go through their approval processes. And my own personal guess is that we will begin deploying for real BEAD dollars in calendar year 2025.
Okay.
And,
May not be the answer some of us want to hear, but if it's the truth, that's the truth, right? I mean, it's going to take a while, right? That's what you're saying, Jim?
It absolutely is going to take a while. And also, Drew, keep in mind, we have to deploy ARPA dollars first. I mean, my team is consumed because those dollars disappear. So we still have $250 million worth of financial investment that needs to be made before we even think about BEAD. So we're really excited about it, but beautifully for South Carolina's purposes, we will be investing BEAD dollars. And of course, that is shrinking the remaining number of unserved homes. So we're going to try and make as much impact as we can with our ARPA dollars, such that our BEAD dollars can be used for some different things. We think we'll be able to make some major investments in community anchors with our BEAD dollars.
We have another question that's a good one from John Fitz. He asks, does the state of South Carolina have a preference regarding fiber versus others? And he also asks, Do you capture and or consider latency and packet loss? And finally, are we likely to see any incentives that might bring fiber to areas that have more than 25.3, i.e. they are, quote, served, but we all know that's not adequate. In other words, getting at this underserved category from 25.3 to 120, is there any way we can make sure we get fiber in there? That's kind of the question as I understand it. So
Yeah.
go ahead, Jim.
It's a great question, and I will tell you that what we're doing, so we have licensed in South Carolina, we've licensed all of the Ookla speed test data for the whole state. So we will have real-time access to that. So, there'll be a nightly drop of data as that comes in. The Ookla data, of course, the raw data includes actual download speed, actual upload speed, but also latency measurements. So we are tracking that stuff, and we're excited to see that. Also, strategically, one of the things we did in South Carolina, which I'm so proud of, is in November of 2021, we made the strategic decision that digital subscriber lines no longer provide reliable 25.3 service anywhere in the state. So really, that's the place where most states are going to see what we would call an underserved customer. And in other words, most historical maps have reflected those homes as being served by 25.3. We don't believe it. So we took all DSL off the table in November of 2021. That opened up all of these regions in South Carolina for investment 2 years ago. So we're moving exponentially quickly down the path. Really, the only places, pockets that I see that will be underserved in South Carolina are really the old school cable. For those of you that are familiar with cable, you've got DOCSIS 2.0, 3.0, 3.1, different flavors of cable. I think really where we're going to see less than 100/20 are places where we have cable networks that haven't been maintained in the last 10, 15 years.
Well, and it's interesting you bring up this. This is a new point I hadn't heard of, that South Carolina has taken DSL off the table, kind of in the way that the federal government for B took satellite service off the table, right? Is that a kind of a customization? What do you hear from your state colleagues about taking DSL off the table, so to speak?
Oh my gosh. I mean, when I when I shared this with my colleagues at the state broadband leader, they stood up and applauded.
I was going to applaud here, but very, very good to hear that. Well, so are they following you? That's the real question. Are they going to do anything about it?
Well, and I think what we've done, Drew, was we celebrated DSL, and I still do. I remember when my house got a digital subscriber line and how happy I was. And let's face it, DSL propelled the U.S. economy for many years. So I celebrate that fact. But I also recognize, and from my Microsoft background, I equate DSL to Windows XP. It's at the end of its useful life, and you celebrate it, and it carried a long way. But we cannot propel the U.S. economy on DSL technology. It's beyond its useful life, and we have to overbuild it.
Okay. A question about tribes, and sort of two-part. One deals with the tribal data sovereignty issue in mapping, but also just could you talk about the role of tribes in South Carolina's broadband process, Jim?
Absolutely. So in the state of South Carolina, we only have one federally recognized tribe. That's the Catawba Nation. But we have lesser known tribes as well. And of course, we want to reach everybody. And the Catawba Nation has been, or is currently blessed with, fairly good connectivity. But we also know that there's a lot of very needy, low-income residents of the nation, and not just Catawba, but the tribal areas. So we're going to approach those areas very graciously from the digital equity perspective and make sure they have the training and the skills. But we still have 250 million of ARPA dollars. The best way to reach everyone is to literally reach everyone. one, for too long, we've been happy, patting ourselves on the back that 93% of the homes or whatever, in the U.S. we're happy and we give ourselves an A grade too often. But when you calculate the raw number of homes that you're missing, 93 is not good. Now we have to be 100.0%.
Yeah.
And of access. And then we've reached everybody. But that's really when digital equity kicks in. And that's when you want all the skills playing out and lifting up those residents so that they can really take advantage. And I know, Drew, you and I, we had the ability to get DSL way back when, and we had 20 years to figure out all of this stuff. So I think the challenge now is to connect a home to fiber or high-speed cable as quickly as possible, and then compress that learning curve instead of 20 years down to 2 years. So that home is doing what they need to do to be successful.
Do you have any additional thoughts on tribal data sovereignty, Jim?
We're not, I would really look for my Western colleagues. Okay. I don't consider myself, the tribal challenges out West greatly outweigh what we have here in South Carolina. I'm not saying we have zero,
right.
But we've got large federal lands with large tribal communities, and the tribes here in South Carolina, at least from an infrastructure perspective, are being taken care of. And then we'll approach that very carefully and thoughtfully with our digital equity programs.
What are some of your other neighboring states doing? Have you interacted with North Carolina and Georgia and Florida? How are their projects coming along?
I'm sorry. I missed a little bit of that. Is that just
I was just asking about. No, we're done with that question. Just moving to more generally, what have you learned? Leonard Robinson asked the question: what has South Carolina's office learned from your neighbors, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida?
Well, one of the greatest things for me is meeting the other state broadband leader colleagues. I mean, I've learned so much. NTIA has fostered a wonderful state broadband leader network. And a couple times a year, we get together. We've become very close friends. We learn, we share ideas. As I've gotten deeper and I've been doing this for a while, so I know all the NTIA folks, but one of the things I've learned to appreciate is I think every state broadband director really has a superpower of some sort, and we all have different things. Obviously, I'm a nerd, so I have a lot of mapping background, but some of my other colleagues have really great background with digital equity, and they've been doing it for a long time. Others have been government affairs leaders and elected officials. So you add all of that up, and when we come together, we share really well. I've been trying to mentor some other states that have needed help with mapping some of the stuff we've figured out, and we're trying to share freely, grant documents and things like that, any ideas along the way. So it's just been a real gift. So I've learned a ton. North Carolina and Georgia, we've become really good friends. I know both broadband directors very, very well, and digital equity directors. So it's been a great, very collaborative situation.
Could you talk a little bit about HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, and have ARPA funds been allocated towards HBCU infrastructure upgrade requirements?
Oh my gosh. Well, I am so proud. That's one of the things I'm most proud of in South Carolina is working with our HBCUs. I believe there's 7 of them in South Carolina. I've been personally involved in doing grant assistance to help. NTIA had a Connecting Minority Communities program aimed at the HBCUs, and I worked, on some grants to help lift them up. We had 2 success stories with the Connecting Minority Community program here in South Carolina. In fact, Vice President Harris came to award Benedict College here in Columbia, South Carolina, their grant award, and I got to meet Vice President Harris when she came. So that was fantastic. Congressman Clyburn, of course, has been a huge supporter. And I look at the HBCUs as being really a crown jewel of the South Carolina economy. And especially as we go into the rural areas, the students and the faculty of the universities are perfectly positioned to lift up their neighboring communities to teach them digital skills. So, if the broadband office can assist, especially when we get into the community anchors, all of the HBCU campuses will be designated CAIs in our model. We will be able to make investments and make sure they have, high-speed connectivity, a wealth of that coming to campus itself. And we're also interested in helping lift up really the building-to-building connectivity on the campus, the dark fiber network, if you will, that will exist with 4 walls.
So you've mentioned several times, Jim, the kind of the updated map that South Carolina is working on, and I think you kind of threw in the June 30th timeframe. Obviously, June 30th, everyone's got that date emblazoned in their brain because that's when the NTIA will be announcing the amounts that each state will have, and those amounts are determined by the FCC's broadband map. And you keep talking about your map. So talk a little bit more about how is the South Carolina map different from the Federal Communications Commission's broadband map, and how do you see that kind of improving going forward vis-a-vis the Federal Communications Commission's broadband map?
Yep. So the cool thing is, Drew, we have the exact same data. So what we do is every 6 months, just like the FCC, we require the state's broadband ISPs to report data to my office. And so what we really begin doing, and we have a fabulous partnership with the FCC, we actually start processing the data the same day the FCC does. And of course, we're going to lower the blades on South Carolina data much quicker than the federal government can, because all we care about is South Carolina. So we're processing in parallel, and we're also auditing our ISPs because we really have a fingerprint of where they were 6 months ago. We have very accurate, detailed map of where they were, and we now know with their fresh data where they claim to be, and we kind of know where our investments have gone, so we can accurately determine errors in their mapping data. And in fact, I just know in our last cycle we've audited several, and we've required them to actually file amended returns with the FCC. And the other thing that we do is we have
did you say you tell providers to refile their reports based on data you've verified? Is that what you just said?
Exactly.
That's amazing. That's the first time I've heard of a state saying, hey, it's not good enough. Go back and fix this.
Oh, yeah. And a really good example of that is if we know, if we funded a project and then we look at their data and the project, let's just say the project was supposed to be done December 31st last year. And then we look at their data in March and it doesn't include that project. Well, guess what? It fails our audit and we require them to fix it. And we've done that multiple times. Where it also shows up, Drew, is on the technology type. So if they misreport the technology type, we have them fix it. And and if they don't fix it, we will report that to the FCC. And especially if they're a multiple state provider, it becomes a scary situation when they face enforcement actions. But yes, we do require amended filings. And we also, when a provider reports to the FCC, they also have a cover page that comes back, a certification that the filing actually occurred. And so when they upload their data, they give us a copy of that cover page so we know the exact timestamp of when it went in.
Great. Well, we have been deluged with questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but let's try to move into a lightning round. I'm going to go as quick as I can and ask the same of you, Jim. So climate requirements, is that a big deal or not?
I'm sorry, repeat, please.
Climate requirements for climate resiliency. Just 10 words. Big deal or not?
Big Big deal. It's kind of an open, we don't have a good answer for it yet, but we're looking at it hard.
We got two people raising issues about letter of credit. How can we deal with this issue? This is kind of can be burdensome. What is your thoughts on that, Jim?
Yep. In South Carolina, we're going to have to work our way through letter of credit as well. In South Carolina, since we pay for the project at the end, we think we're protecting the state investment pretty well. And we're also waiving bond requirements for ISPs. One of the things we did is we waived bond requirements for any ISP that had over 100 million of telecommunications capital or equipment in production.
Okay.
So that was a good way to save a lot of money.
We got a couple people, Rick Schroeder and Sean McDowell, asking about electric co-ops. What's your take on the way they can play a significant role in BEAD?
Well, electric co-ops are playing a big role in South Carolina right now in ARPA. And what's been really exciting to watch is the way the partnerships have come together. The electric co-ops are working together with rural telephone co-ops. They share a common DNA, and they are moving very, very rapidly. We have a couple projects where we have over 400 people in a single county working to build out the county right now. It's very, very exciting.
A question about what are the best lessons learned thus far with ARPA funding and other things you've already dealt with on helping the unserved and underserved communities? What are the lessons learned thus far?
I guess lessons learned is, one of the things from us is if you want to make sure a project gets built, you have to ask for the data on the front end. So building requirements into your grant documents so that you can confirm construction at the end is a really big deal. So we have iterated through a couple of grant cycles now. We now embed and require, for example, Ookla speed test data. So every time a home is connected, we require an Ookla speed test data with a street address. And then that flows into the back end and gives us good confidence.
What about other
I
speed
think
tests? Can you include other speed tests or like measurement lab?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you well know, mainline construction is best tested with engineering grade equipment. So what we figured out is, guess what? You can take when the engineering grade test for the mainline is done, you just take a picture of the screen, and it's got the latitude and the longitude in it, and It also has the timestamp. So we will map that, and we have complete construction of mainline. Yes.
I want to also ask about Muni broadband. Is that a restriction in South Carolina? How will that affect you all?
I'm sorry, broke up just a little bit on me.
Municipal broadband limitations on municipal broadband. Is that an issue in
Yes.
South Carolina? How will you deal with that?
Well, we actually have municipal broadband. In fact, Orangeburg County has its own broadband office. We did a little bit of stuff with the BTOP program. There was another municipal network created in early 2000. Candidly, it's not holding us up at all.
Okay.
Pretty much every municipality in the state now has broadband or has a funded project underway. So it hasn't held us up whatsoever.
All right. Penultimate question, Jim. Can you explain the role of the Broadband Advisory Council in facilitating collaboration and the role of local coordination generally?
Well, our BBAC has been awesome. We formed it a couple of years ago. So we have the provider community represented, of course, but we've also folded in other elements of state government, public safety, Department of Education, the nonprofit sector. It's been an exciting way. We're looking at that as evolving, especially with the BEAD requirements. And we're kind of taking that under advisement in terms of who might need to be added on. But it's been a great resource and continues to be.
Well, we have run out of time. This has been an incredible hour, gone by super fast. I'm a huge fan of the Palmetto State, Jim. I love going down there. And my last question for you is about your state. What is the best beach in South Carolina?
Oh, wow. I will get myself in trouble here, but I think I got to go with Hilton Head because, you know, I lived there for 8 years. My family loves it. And I would vote for Hilton Head.
Well, that will have to be our last word for today. Join us again for our next Ask Me Anything, which will be coming up soon. Look on the schedule at broadband.io. And on behalf of everyone in the broadband community, thank you, Jim Stritzinger, for spending this hour with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you online. Take care.
Grateful, Drew. Thank you.